Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. As I've told you before, the content of this video each week usually stems from situations that arise in the office and questions that come up. And I want to talk to you today about rental equipment as it affects an agreement of purchase and sale. Had a salesperson contact me this past week. They got a call from a client buyer who they'd sold a house to. And the buyer was excited, moved into the house. They were there for only a few weeks, and they were surprised when they got in the mail a bill for the rental of the hot water heater. And that was a surprise to them. As far as they knew, they had purchased a house that included the hot water tank as part of the purchase. They went to the agreement of purchase and sale, looked under rental items. There was no reference to hot water tank. And so what happened was the seller obviously forgot to mention that there was a rental item. The agent forgot to ask the question or do any digging, and they ended up with a situation where they wanted to own the hot water tank, but they didn't. The agent who represented them contacted the listing agent, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, well, one of those things. So they contacted the broker of the brokerage that had the listing, and the broker said, you know, if it isn't on the agreement of purchase and sale that it's included in the purchase price, then you can assume that it's not, which is a ridiculous thing to say. You don't put on an agreement of purchase and sale, this agreement includes the furnace, it includes the air conditioning unit, it includes the electrical panel, it includes, you don't list all these things, and you typically wouldn't list something that's included. And I think you need to take a look also at what it says in the agreement of purchase and sale. It says, unless otherwise stated in this agreement or any schedule hereto, the seller agrees to convey all fixtures and chattels included in the purchase price, free from all liens, encumbrances, or claims affecting the said fixture and chattel. So the question is, what's included in the purchase price? And again, it comes down to what's an integral part of the property. And obviously a furnace is, an air conditioning unit is, a hot water heater is, and so you don't have to specifically spell out that these are included the way you would if it was, for example, the drapes were being left or an appliance like the fridge and the stove. And you also have to assume that they're in good working order unless it states otherwise. So you've got a problem on your hands because of this that happened. And I think we need to understand or spend a minute and take a look at this business about rental items, and especially as applies to hot water tanks. It used to be we would think about two different categories. One was a rental and one was a lease. And back then, we used to have third-party companies who would come to the door. Remember, you see ads and listen to them on the radio or see them on television. They'd say, well, he had a clipboard. And these were parties that were trying to sell a package of a third-party provider for a hot water tank. And they would come with a lower rental price than the utility company was charging. They were a lease. And the problem with that was it was a fixed term, and you were committed to that fixed term. And if you decided that you wanted to get rid of the hot water tank prior to the expiration of the term, you had to pay them all the lost rent that they would have otherwise received. But we said if we were on part of the Enbridge and it was the gas company that was providing it, it was month to month. And anytime you wanted, you could tell them to remove the hot water tank. That's not the case any longer. Your utility companies are now tying it in long term. In fact, Enbridge works on a 14-year amortization. So let's suppose you're paying about $400 a year for your hot water rental. That's probably about what you're paying. If the day you put it in there, you change your mind, they're going to say, well, sorry, you owe us 14 years of rent. Well, that's $5,600. That's what's going to cost you to have that hot water tank removed. You can buy it for less than $1,000, but you're going to pay them $5,600, and you're going to pay them another $100 to come and get it and take it away again. Even though you never signed a long-term contract, even though it isn't what we thought of as a lease, it's a rental, but it's committed. And the chances are, with some of the other things, they may be registered on title. In the case of a hot water tank rental through your utility company, the chances are it's not. But you still have that binding commitment from them. And the other thing that you need to be careful about here is that Enbridge is now in the process of separating the rental and putting it under Enercare. And this is especially important if you are a landlord or if you're representing a landlord. When you rent the property out, you tell the tenant that they're responsible for the gas, and they sign to it and agree to it. And they get their bill, and in the gas bill, there is the rental of the hot water tank. And that's fine, they're used to that, no problem. Well, now all of a sudden, it's not in the gas bill any longer. It's a separate bill comes out from Enercare. Now, who's going to pay it? Are they going to pay it? Are you going to pay it? Is it going to be sent to you? Is it going to be sent to them? You got to be careful about this. It's coming up, and it really highlights this business about a rental fee. If you end up with a hot water tank, as in the case we mentioned, and you don't want it, but it's under a long-term lease, the rental company can either have the seller pay it out, and then the buyer can get free and clear to put his own tank in, or the rental company can approve the new buyer and the buyer assume the responsibility of the lease. But something has to be done. And it isn't just hot water tanks. We had a situation again this last week. A salesperson was showing a property and procuring an offer on a property that was a power sale. And he drafted up the offer, and then he got thinking about it because the bank had a schedule saying, you're buying it as is, where is, we're not making any warranties or assurances of anything about the condition of the property. He got a little bit concerned about it. The agreement of the listing didn't show any rental items, but he did a search on title. And to his surprise, he found out that both the furnace and the air conditioning unit were leased and lien on title. Now, it was quite a mess because the seller wasn't the owner, the seller was the bank. But you still had a problem that had to be dealt with. So we concerned about that. And it isn't just hot water tanks, as we've seen. It can be furnaces, it can be air conditioning units. And another one we've mentioned before, and it continues to be a problem, is solar panels. When you've got solar panels on a roof of a house or a building, anything, a property you're selling, one of two things happens. Either the property owner owns the solar panels, or a third-party provider owns the solar panels. If the property owner owns them, no problem. He can convey them in the transaction, and he gets a residual from the hydro company, or some of the hydro or all of the hydro is used to reduce his hydro bill. If it's a third-party provider, then he either gets a monthly residual, or he could have got the whole thing up front. We had one not that long ago. There were solar panels on the house. It turned out that it was on a long-term contract, and the owner of the property had got the full benefit up front. So the person buying the property was going to have to inherit the obligations for 20 years and get nothing for it. And if he wanted to pay it out and get rid of the solar panels, it was going to cost over $50,000. So it becomes a very, very important thing to find out about these things and make sure you don't make a mistake. So if you are a listing agent, you're going about to take a listing, you really need to ask the question always, are there any rental items on the property? Well, they'll say, what do you mean? Well, what about the hot water tank? What about the furnace? What about the air conditioning unit? You give them, prompt them a little bit, give them some ideas and some suggestions. But they may forget, and they may not be as upfront with you as they should be. And so you need to go down, have a look at the hot water tank especially, and see if there's a sticker on there for Enbridge or something. See if you can tell by looking at it. And then ask them for a copy of their utility bill and see if there's any rental item on it. Do your due diligence as much as you can to find out. And if you're really suspicious, like the agent was when he was selling the power of sale, you may want to do a quick search of title. If there's any major component that's on a lease, it should be registered on title. So be very, very careful about this. You want to find out up front, put it in the listing. You don't want a surprise at closing, and certainly you don't want a surprise after closing. Thank you very much for taking the time. Look forward to talking to you again next week.